Just this last week, I saw a comment on Facebook made by Pastor Joshua Fryman out on Long Island. Been hearing some good things about his ministry out there, and thankful for him. I've known Josh for a number of years, and he's a good man. He talked about how he had gotten a new cell phone, how excited he was. And his wife had said to him, "You need to get a case for that cell phone so you don't drop it and break it."
This is Master Ministry. Tips, tools, and truths to advance eternal effectiveness in ministry. I'm your host, Douglas Hammett. Let's move into the broadcast now.
Well, I had intended for this to be a single episode, but typical preacher fashion, I'm going to stretch it into a short series if I can. But really, it is that critical, it is that important in your ministry and in your life itself that you take heed to what I'm going to give you today. Yeah, we're talking about counsel, okay? The Bible says in the book of Proverbs 11:14, it says, "Where no counsel is, the people fall. But in the multitude of counselors, there is safety." I want to talk to you today about what is counsel. What is counsel? And I think the perspective on this, the simple twist I'm going to give you here, can make a radical change in your willingness to accept counsel and to give counsel in a right way. And so, listen on, if you will, okay? But let me start, if I may, back, well, at the beginning in my life anyway. I was not raised in a Christian home, and so many of the biblical things that I've learned, I had to learn after I was born again. And I'd learned some practical character issues as a young man growing up. But basically, all of my Bible learning came after I got saved. Shortly after I got saved, God called me to preach, and then I ended up in the ministry. And for the first few years, I really had no major troubles in the churches where I pastored and worked. But then came, and this has been about 40 years ago as I'm recording this now, in fact, probably this year, 41 years maybe. But anyway, at least 40 years ago, that I began with this particular situation coming about. I was pastoring in a western state, and as I was pastoring there, we were experiencing some great times. I mean, revival had broken loose. We'd seen a number of people saved. The church was just exploding at the seams. I mean, just literally, it was just, wow, God was so good. And in the middle of that, we had a family that had come, and it had been, I don't know, 4 months before that, whatever. And they'd showed up on our doorstep, and they had, as I remember now, maybe 2 children. I don't recall. And they'd come from a church down south and had a testimony of knowing Christ their Savior and being in a Baptist church and so on. And we took them into membership, and they wanted to help with our young people. And so we began to let them help as helpers in the youth department. And our youth department was exploding, and people were getting saved, young people were getting saved. It really was an exciting time. We were in the middle of this, and we had just completed a revival meeting. We'd seen a number of people get saved, just some spectacular things happening. And I was at the top of the mountain. Let me tell you, I was so excited. And then I got a phone call. And when I got a phone call from a family who were close with this other family that was helping with the youth. And they began to tell me some really sordid details of the life of this family. And as it turned out, they weren't a family at all. This man and woman were actually living together. And the woman had a husband that she was still married to in another state. And I believe, if I remember right, maybe the man had a wife in another state. Neither one divorced. But anyway, they were living together and living a very vulgar, wild life. But then they'd come to church and act like they were supposed to act. And it was not a good situation, just to be quite honest with you. And this family had been close with them and cared about them a great deal. And so I said, well, you know, this is a simple matter. I mean, this is just a matter of church discipline. I've got to go talk to them. And they begged me. They said, well, preacher, and they were a little older family. I was young in the ministry. I hadn't been in ministry long, and I was just a young kid, wet behind the ears in life itself. And they begged me. They said, well, could we go talk to them and just deal with this? And so I said, okay, you go deal with them, and then let me know what happens, and we'll go from there. And so they went, talked with the family, and talked with them, and the family said, look, we're gonna leave the church, and we've got to get this all worked out with our marriages so we can get married to each other and get it all settled right, but we're just going to leave quietly. And so the family got back to me and said, here's how it's going to be, and I said, okay, well, let's just go with it. Now, understand, this is a young preacher, me, doing some things here. I'm just kind of feeling my way along, and hoping that, okay, well, maybe this will just go away. And so the next day, this all happened, and then the very next day, my phone at the church explodes with phone call after phone call from church members who are all upset. Why are you running this family out of the church? Why are you running them off? Why don't you love these people? I mean, it was just incredible. And so I had to call a church meeting that Thursday night, and I called the meeting, and at that church meeting, this couple showed up. And we had, as you can imagine, lots of church people there. They wanted to see what was happening, the fireworks, and hear that pastor's explanation, why he did these horrible things. And so as we got there, I introduced the meeting and just briefly explained the situation. This couple was living together. They were not married. They came into the church. They don't have any business in the church living like this. They need to get their life right. And then the next thing I knew, the guy and his girlfriend walked in the church, and he began to stand up, and he wanted to explain. But it wasn't an explanation. It was an explosive cursing match where he called me everything. I mean that you could imagine. He was cursing in the church house in front of everybody, and just lambasting me up one side, down the other. And then the woman got up and did the same, and then they stormed out. And then one of the older ladies in the church, she'd just been there for a short while, gotten saved short bit before, and she got upset. She said, well, if this is the kind of church you're going to be, I'm leaving it. I'll never be back. And she left. And it was a couple of weeks later, she calmed down, and she got with me, and she said, preacher, I want to apologize. I was wrong. I love you. You've meant so much to me, and I was doing wrong, and I shouldn't have done that. Let my emotions get away. Now, all that, long story short, okay? In the middle of all of this, we dealt with it. I thought it was all settled when this family had talked with the couple that were in this sin, and I thought, man, it's all taken care of. And it was the next morning when I got the phone calls on my phone that I picked up the telephone myself, and I called a former pastor of mine, Norman Noble, and I called Norman, and I said to Norman, he's with the Lord now, I said, Norman, here's my situation. And Norman listened a little bit, and then he said, Doug, I'll never forget it. He said, why didn't you call me first? And I said, well, Norman, I didn't know I needed to. Why would I need to call you? He said, you've got a big mess on your hands, and it would have been easier to fix this if you'd done everything right to start with, instead of just plodding into it and getting it into this kind of a mess. And so he helped me kind of sort out how to move forward from there, for which I was very thankful. Now, here's what I took away from all of that. I mean, in the middle of all that, God was so good to us and protected me and so on. But at the end of the day, what I learned was this. From that day forward, don't be so stinking bashful about asking for other people's advice and thoughts in decisions that I'm making before I make them. Now, wow, what a lesson did I learn that day. And God used that in my life. And I called not only Norman, but other preachers from there on, and still do to this very day. I'm in my 60s now, but I still call others, and I get advice before I make decisions, and am careful about that. See, the Bible says where no counsel is, the people fall. And that's exactly what happened in our church. What God had been doing up to that point just kind of came to a grinding halt at that point, and everything slowed down and went into slow motion. And it wasn't the people's fault. It was the pastor's fault, my fault. I chose not to get counsel. Now, did I do wrong in the sense of sin? No. Could I have handled the situation better? Absolutely I could have. And if I'd only gotten some counsel and some help, I could have done that very quickly with the insight of others and been well aware of what might have taken place and protected against that for the church's welfare. But I didn't do it. The Bible says it's in the multitude of counselors that we're going to find that safety. Again, in Proverbs 15:22, it says, without counsel, purposes are disappointed. But in the multitude of counselors, they are established. So let's ask the question, what exactly is counsel in the Bible? Well, counsel is, should we put it this way, counsel is advice. Counsel is advice for your particular situation. Advice which calls out the purposes. What are your purposes? These purposes that can be disappointed. What's your goal in mind? What are you trying to accomplish? Is your goal really what it ought to be? What are the purposes? It deals with purposes. It deals with perspectives. See, everybody has a perspective. That couple had a perspective that were living together. The family that tried to help that couple had a perspective, and they had a good perspective in that they cared about that family. I had a perspective that I just wanted the situation dealt with and gone so our church could keep on with revival and seeing what God was doing. Brother Noble had a perspective, and his perspective was after years of experience of watching things unfold like this. He knew some of the landmines to look out for. God had a perspective, and that perspective needed to be honored in that situation a little better than what it was, quite honestly. And so counsel is not only dealing with purposes, it's dealing with perspectives. It's dealing with processes. How are you going about this? What are these steps that I am getting ready to take? And really it's all about plans, laying well-laid plans so that the purposes don't get disappointed, so that the end goal gets accomplished. And so laying out plans and knowing the contingencies with all of that. Now, that's what counsel is. Hang on for the twist in just a moment, okay? Just this last week, I saw a comment on Facebook made by Pastor Josh Fryman out on Long Island. Been hearing some good things about his ministry out there, and thankful for him. I've known Josh for a number of years, and he's a good man, and doing a good work. And he wrote about this. It's one of those kind of funny ha-ha situations. He talked about how he had gotten a new cell phone, how excited he was. And his wife had said to him, you need to get a case for that cell phone so you don't drop it and break it. And he kind of just, he went on and did his own thing, as we commonly do, right? And then he dropped it. First thing he thought about was, my wife told me to get a case. And so he wrote it on Facebook and was brave enough to let the rest of us laugh with him. No, I didn't say at. We've all done this how many times before, okay? And so he talked about it. But out of that comes this thought. And we've all done this, haven't we? We've gotten advice from a loved one. We've gotten advice certainly from our wives or from if you're married and a lady, from your husband. But we all get advice from people that just kind of maybe casually tell us, you ought to do this, you ought to do that. Others who get a little more intense and in our face, you need to do this, and they're convinced that this is what we should do, and we don't maybe listen for whatever reason. And so out of this, we need to be asking some serious questions. Do I need to listen to the counsel that everybody gives me? Do I have to do everything that other people tell me? Of course not. Do I have to obey my wife in everything? Now, hopefully my wife doesn't watch this, but I'm going to say no, okay? Be a man about it. Make your own decisions. But when you make the wrong decision, be a man about it, like Josh was, and admit it. Your wife was right, okay? And at the end of the day, we got to ask some questions, okay? Out of a situation like this, and we've all experienced them over and over again, should you give your wife more heed? Probably. Ought to sit down and listen a little more. Sometimes my wife will give me advice in passing, and it's not really intense enough that I recognize it as advice. It's just a comment, and it stops right there. But other times she sits me down and says, Doug, we need to talk about this, and she's got some good wisdom. However, my job is not to do what my wife says. And contrary to opinion, it's not always my wife's job to do what I say. We are individual people and we need to do some serious thinking on our own, but we should give consideration to people who come into our life and give us counsel. They give us advice. So what lesson do we really learn from this dropping of the cell phone, if you will? Well, I think it is, yes, we should give consideration to what other people say. We don't have time to consider everybody and every piece of advice that comes our way. We do need to give consideration, especially the people that love us and are trying to look out for our very best interests. But then we must make a responsible decision, responsible on our own shoulders, for our own choice in what we're getting ready to do. And in that case, it might mean, okay, I don't really think I need a case for this phone. But if I make that choice, I made it, and when I drop it and break the screen, it's my fault, not my wife's. Okay? All right. There we go. I said it. All right. Now here's your twist, if I can. Okay? One twist in understanding that I think can make all the difference in the world in getting counsel. And it is this. This advice that you're going to get in counsel needs to be tailored to your situation. In other words, advice is just general advice, often given, like advertising. But what do I need specifically? To get that kind of advice, I need to be able to divulge to the person that's giving me advice the details sufficient so that they know enough to be able to give me detailed advice. So then I need to ask the question, does their advice fit my situation? And I don't tell everybody all the details of my life. And some people who give me advice, I'm not going to tell them any of the details of my life. And I'm going to walk on. I may give some thought to what they have to say. It's good perspective or bad perspective or a perspective that just doesn't fit for my particular situation. I want to give careful thought to it before I reject it or act upon it. But second of all, then ask the question, not only does it fit, but is it indeed the best advice for my situation? Is this the best? Not just good, but is it the best? And so as I come to this business of what is counsel, I realize that counsel needs to deal with a number of things. It needs to deal with the purposes, the perspectives, the processes, the plans, all of that. And I need to sit down and give due consideration. And certainly the larger matters in our lives, things like church discipline, those kind of things, we definitely need some advice from outside. Not that the advice is going to tell us everything we have to do or they're going to make the decision for us. If you can catch that, this counsel is not to make my decision for me. This counsel is to give me the perspective that I need so I can make a wise choice that God will be pleased with. That's what counsel is all about. God bless you. Thanks for listening today.
Thanks for listening. You know, your ministry does not have to stagnate or die. If you want to get out of the box and into the book, get some help right now. Give me a shout at pdhammett@gmail.com. We'll discuss what you need and recommend a course of action. Get in touch with me. You can also find tips, tools, and truths to advance eternal effectiveness in ministry and make an eternal impact at masterministry.com. Thanks for listening. Now let's go make a difference.